Yeah, it's not often I have two guests on simultaneously. So if we stumble over each other, then yeah, that's so be it.
I'll default to Brandon when there's a doubt.
That's right. Yeah.
We
Well, Brandon
literally
and I
stumble
go.
all the time, so it's fine.
Yeah, that's okay. Me too. Brandon, you and I go way back. Here's what I like to do. I'd love to kind of get a brief like bio background. I know folks who've read your books have that access, but most of my show may not, have familiarity. So we'll start with you, Brandon. And, I knew you were back in the teams, or actually, I don't think we met until after, but I know a little bit about your background. Why don't you give us a brief bio and kind of like what inspired you to get into the teams, kind of like a summary of the Red Circle,
Sure.
your book.
So I think like many guys that migrate to the teams, we all come from these crazy backgrounds and life stories. And I think the one thing that would be common among all of us, we are no strangers to adversity, right? So my mom is American, my dad's Canadian. I was born up in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. My dad had lost a business and had this dream with my mother to always sail around the world. So the catalyst for that was, okay, my dad declared bankruptcy, really took it hard, and they ended up buying this 50-foot ketch in Vancouver. We sailed it down to California and saved some money. And I lived on the boat for 5 years. No television, just books, and played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. And
did you spend a lot of time off the boat? Like
yeah,
I imagine you were in and out exploring places.
My front yard was the Pacific Ocean, so I learned to surf at 11 and South Jetty in Ventura. It's like a really heavy beach break, and Wedge Peak off the jetty. Became a waterman, and my mom said, hey, this scuba diving boat called the Dive Boat Peace wants a young kid to work summers and help fill scuba tanks and help divers off with their gear. And the owner said that him or the captain will certify you to scuba dive. So I was working on this really crappy job at the boat store, cleaning toilets and mopping up, because my dad was like, you need to get a job. So when my mom says this job came up,
everybody should clean toilets at some point in their life, by the way.
Good character building exercise. So I get this job, and it was a dream job. And I learned how to scuba dive. I also really learned how to overcome a lot of fear at an early age. I still remember being in this boat was a private boat. We had a hot tub, private chef. We would take scuba divers out to Channel Islands and dive these incredible spots all over the different islands off the coast of California. But I remember being 13 as my first season on the boat, and the captain, Mike, wakes me up at 2 a.m. We're off Tyler Bight and what's the northernmost island, the San Miguel Island. There's a sea lion rookery, and what eats sea lions is great white sharks. Like, it was very sharky water. And Captain Mike wakes me up at 2 a.m. and he's like, hey, Webb, get your suit on. The anchor's stuck. We need you to go down and get it unstuck. And I'd done that in the daylight because it's faster to send a diver down, because we had to move, the weather picked up, we had to move the boat to calmer water. So anyway, I'm all this stuff's going through my head, like, wait, man, it's sharks down there, it's nighttime, it's 3 a.m.
So why don't you go, Captain?
I was like, this is kind of crazy. And I just was like scared shitless. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, I guess I just got to suck it up. And then, I went and did the dive. And as oftentimes as we learn, the story in our head is much worse than the actual physical activity. So I did it. And that job was a dream job for me. I learned so much. I had great mentors, because a lot of my friends in that kind of harbor surfer skateboard scene, including my best friend, just fell off of the planet just when it got into drugs and all sorts of bad stuff. So the dive boat really saved me. Now, fast forward, we'd done a cruise to Mexico. I was homeschooled for a year. On our sailboat, we came back. I got this job in the dive boat. Now my dad, a few years later, he's like, hey, I don't want to be the guy talking about sailing to New Zealand that never does. So, he's like, we're going to do it. And I was 15 at the time. By this time I was making really good money on the boat. I was trading my lobster to the local sushi restaurant for food credit. I had a really good life, and I didn't want to go on this trip. The last thing I wanted to do, I wanted to get my driver's license and do what other 16-year-old boys do, chase girls and hang out with their buddies. But I went. We made it. We sailed all down to Baja, Mexico, mainland, all the way down to Acapulco. And Acapulco is kind of a hopping off point to the South Pacific because of the trade winds, and it's kind of a single reach on the sailboat. And so, without going into details, lost my virginity in Acapulco on my 16th birthday.
You don't need to go into details for that.
We sailed to Nuka Hiva. I think Hiva Oa, then Nuka Hiva. But we made landfall in the South Pacific, 30-day passage. And my dad and I, we started really arguing over seamanship because I had known from working on the boat that the bottom composition of the South Pacific, very different than the sand and kind of muddy bottom of the off the coast of California, Mexico. I said, we need to change the anchor to the Bruce anchor because the CQR anchor, which is made for mud and sand, it's gonna drag. And he's like, whatever. First night we drug anchor, and of course, what do? Diplomatically do as a 16-year-old kid with a chip on my shoulder. I was like, I fucking told you so, you know? And my dad and I were just like butting heads. So this continued on till we made it to Pape de Tahiti. We had a big fight and we had a family meeting, and my dad says, look, you're super independent. I know you didn't want to be here. Maybe it's best that you get off the boat. And so we had this discussion, found a catamaran and a family, a couple with a young baby that really needed help sailing to Hawaii. So I grabbed the backpack and a few $100s. I called, this is before cell phones, I had to get on the landline, call Bill, my old boss and the owner of the boat. I said, Bill, can I come live on the boat and work? He's like, yeah. I said, I finished my junior year early. He's like, yeah, come on back, no problem. So I sailed, you know, my mom was crying, sister crying. My dad was not crying. He was good to see me go.
That's pretty cool. Like 16, you just literally get on a boat with this random family and sail from Tahiti to Hawaii.
It was an adventure.
Awesome.
We're just like, and it was so much faster than our catch. I remember we averaged probably 12 knots. In sailing, that's pretty fast. And so, yeah, I made it to Hilo. And look, I'm not going to lie. I think I cried myself to sleep the first 3 nights, like really scared. Like, what the hell did I just do? But then you just kind of like pull up your socks and get on with it, and made it to Hilo, flew back to California. You know, one of the guys.
I'm curious, do you still stay in touch with that family, Brandon?
You know what? I didn't. I didn't stay in touch, and I would love to get back in touch. I'm really shocked because the boat's name is Shiloh, and I talk about it in the Red Circle. Because usually a lot of people reach out from your past, but I would love to see how they're doing because it was an adventure. You know,
I bet.
But anyway, I came back, started working on the boat, and really, I think what happened, I had some good mentors on the boat, and I could see my friends who were kind of growing up to be teenagers were really getting into hardcore drugs, crystal meth, and I was just like, I knew I need to get out of this environment. I'd always wanted to be a pilot, but I read a book, Rogue Warrior. One of the guys on the scuba diving boat gave me Rogue Warrior, and I realized that also
that's Dick Marcinko's book.
Dick Marcinko's book, and I realized that. Okay, I don't have the academics to go into the academy on the pilot path, but I can do this. I can go to BUD/S. And so I just really started training and focusing on becoming a SEAL. And then when I turned 18, I joined the Navy. As you know, back then you couldn't get a direct pipeline into BUD/S training. You had to take a job, and I had, you know, whatever reason, most recruiters don't really understand that, especially back then, the path to SEAL training. I went to MEPS in I think Bakersfield. The job guy said, hey, with your diving experience, you'd be a great rescue swimmer, guaranteed. We'll promote you to E4 right away after A school. and you'll be in shape to go to SEAL training. What I didn't realize was that it was an undermanned job, just like the SEALs. So it took me a while.
Hard to get out of once
it
you're
was
in
really
it.
hard to get out of, because I passed the PT test in boot camp. Then they told me, look, you can't. You're in a undermanned job. You got to go to your squadron and then reapply. So anyway, I did that. And it was, maybe I needed it, because it did mature me. And I had some really good leadership lessons. I had some really good bosses and some really bad bosses, which I think sometimes you learn more from the bad ones than you do the good. But I was at HS6 in San Diego, and I remember the first deployment on the Lincoln, which actually is a good tie-in here to John and I in the series that we're writing together. When this was right when they were integrating women on the Abraham Lincoln. It's a massive aircraft carrier, I think almost 6,000 people on the ship, and 10% of the crew is now women. And we had a really bad captain. He didn't talk to the crew. He never came over the 1MC. We had the worst accident. The Lincoln had, I think, the worst accident in the fleet. We had an underway replenishment collision. We lost a plane in the water. It was really bad and then we had a sexual predator on the boat. This guy was molested. He molested, I think, 6 or 7 women, and they never caught him. And so the idea stuck with me years later, that what if this was a serial killer? And that was the premise for John and I's book 1 and Steel Fear. But I'll try not to make a long story too much longer, but with my intro. But
no, it's fascinating, actually. Your life is fascinating. I think that's awesome.
I went
really cool.
So I was at HS6. I did 2 deployments. Eventually my second package got approved to BUD/S. The squadron didn't want to let me go. I was too qualified the first time, and I just made myself such a pain in the ass. The second time, they're like, okay, get out of here. Which I talk about in the Red Circle as a contentious.
Yeah, you weren't going to take no for an answer.
And I had a really bad chief, and actually that's what him and I went head to head, and he's finally like, okay, I need to get you out of here. So I classed up at 215. I think 226 started, 23 of us finished, 6-ish months later. Went to SEAL Team 3. Had
my alma mater.
Had an amazing. I love SEAL Team 3, and it's funny because so many characters came out of that command, right? Chris Kyle included. It's just, we've got a really interesting alma mater. But I was fortunate enough. I had an amazing SEAL platoon. I had Dan Goulart and Tommy Barker as my kind of chief LPO mentors, and had an amazing first platoon. Like, I feel like these guys really took the new guys under the wing. We deployed and then that platoon was with Glenn, where I met Glenn Doherty.
Glenn Doherty,
well. We deployed to the Middle East. That's when the Cole happened. We were on the Cole right after it was bombed in Yemen. Kind of a wake up call. Then came back from that deployment, and I had a young family. I had a wife who was 8 months pregnant, and these reenlistment bonuses, if you could get them tax free, you could save, I think, $10,000. And the ops officer Kevin at the time said, "Look, I'll reenlist you tax free, but you gotta join this platoon, Echo platoon." And I was just like, "Oh, I don't want to go to Echo," because that was the platoon at the command that everybody knew that was fucked up, and
right,
and
that was the misfit.
They
platoon.
Disbanded it, as sometimes they do. Right, it was just too. They failed. I think they failed their ORE exam, which is an operational readiness exam. And so Kevin's like, "We're rebuilding. We need some experience." So I did it, and like the first month we were doing training, and I'm looking at these guys. They didn't even know how to fast rope, and I'm like, what did I get myself into? But then 9/11 happened, and I deployed to war with these guys. But we had to be fair, we had an amazing chief, Chris Dye, and we had an incredible platoon commander, which Chris Cassidy. I'm sure you know Chris.
Oh yeah. Chris is amazing. He went on to be an astronaut.
Chris, I think he's running the astronaut program at NASA now, but Chris was an amazing leader. And, I deployed to Afghanistan. My son was born while I was gone, Hunter.
Ouch.
And, I think about Afghanistan a lot because, you know, in the sense, like, how come I don't have a lot of the issues that I know a lot of other teammates have? And I think, and veterans for that matter, but I think it's because when I first went to Afghanistan, we had a purpose. Like, you know, you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, its purpose is big. It's a big part of, you know, resiliency, and a lifetime of resiliency is having some purpose. And the purpose was destroy the terror training camps, put the Taliban out of power, and try and, you know, kill Osama bin Laden. And we did the first two things very quickly, and probably should have left Afghanistan, because it turned into kind of a mess. But I had a good deployment. You know, I got to put my skills to use. I was proud of my deployment. You know, I think every SEAL you want to get in that arena and test yourself. And, you know, the guy we ended up having a really good platoon and deployment, did a lot of good work, came back and was a sniper instructor for TRADET. I was in a sniper cell. And then a guy, Bob, and another Master Chief from SEAL Team 6 had joined up to revamp the sniper program, and it recruited me to be part of the core cadre. And then once I went down there and gave up my cushy buds orders to go be a sniper instructor. Bob's like, hey, I'm out of here, so I'm gonna make sure you make chief, because I just got capped to E6. I was the number 1 promote at TRADET. And then he's like, I'm going to set you up to make chief. And he put me in charge as a sniper course manager, which was an E8 senior chief billet. And I was an E6 at the time, like a newly capped E6. And so it's a lot of responsibility, but very, very rewarding work. And then, but at the end of that 3 years, I was completely burned out. We had transitioned the course from a mix of, you know, San Diego and Camp Pendleton to this Army base in Indiana. And I was just traveling so much, and you know, I was just kept missing these events with my kids, and I just hit burnout. And at that point I was like, you know what, I just need a break. Even if I just get out for a year, I can always come back. And then, you know, I started to think about, what am I going to do next? And, you know, I got involved with Glenn and some of what he was doing for a little bit, but then, you know, I had this crazy idea to do Win Zero, which, you know,
right. Which I invested in.
And, you know, my family invested in.
Win Zero, just for the listeners, it was you had an idea to build a big, dynamic military law enforcement training center in the desert off of San Diego. And you had this beautiful piece of property, and, it would have been great were it not for the government of California.
Yeah, no, it's sad, you know, and it's humbling. I mean, you know this as an entrepreneur, Mark. It's tough when you put your life savings and take other people's money and it all goes to hell. And then my wife was like, look, I love you, but I don't want to be married to you anymore. And now I'm divorced, you know, and she's,
you went from hero to zero, right? You went from being a Navy SEAL, running the sniper program,
right to the bottom,
failed business and failed marriage, right to the bottom.
One way.
That would drive a lot of people to drink, right there.
Yeah, and I actually, again, this was one of the moments I can remember sitting in my Toyota truck on the cliffs of La Jolla, thinking just that. I'm like, I was on top of the world. Now I've lost everything, and, you know, fuck my life. And then I was like, wait a minute. You know, and I credit the time where I spent with the cadre, the sniper program. We got to work with these incredible consultants, and one of them was Lanny Basham. I'm sure you're familiar with Lanny's work. He was kind of one of the pioneers of mental management in the Olympics, and Lanny became a mentor and a really close friend of mine. We still talk, and really was instrumental in teaching me this principles of mental management, which I taught to the sniper students, and saw firsthand how powerful visualization, positive self-talk, positive instruction versus negative instruction could be. And so I said, okay, I got to reframe this. I got to go, okay, you know, life sucks right now, but at least I have a good relationship with my ex. We care about the kids, a good relationship with their family. I've learned a ton, you know, from a guy that couldn't even read a P&L and balance sheet. Now I understand how to read financial statements. I understand how to borrow money through the SBA. So I'll be okay. And so I just kind of had to reframe it. And then I ended up taking a job for L3. A headhunter recruited me. So for 2 years, I kind of built back my savings and was right. And I started to get into writing. And that's when I had this idea for the Red Circle. And I was running a blog for military.com and had the concept for SOFREP. And those two things.
SOFREP, for those who don't understand it, it's a military acronym for Special Operations Forces Report, right?
Yeah.
The SOF report that would come back from the field to HQ. There's different, summaries of what happened during the day, good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so that was the idea behind
exactly. And it started out as a culture blog, just interviewing guys that have been to war. And then we started to break news. And then I really, for a couple of years, to be honest, I really struggled with how do I do this? I've never been trained to run a newsroom. Now guys in the community are bringing their dirty laundry to me. And I really struggled. Thankfully, I knew a guy, Jeff, that was the editor-in-chief of the Union Tribune. And I had some other guys to reach out, even you, I talked to about a few things.
I tried to do something similar with NavySeal.com. It was difficult to do the newsy stuff, and I got in trouble actually for the SEALs.
Oh yeah, it's super hard.
Big time.
And you can't do anything right. So
I know.
And so, I had to learn how to run SOFREP as a news site, which I feel like we're in a pretty good place today. I still run that business. So fast forward, I ended up moving to New York and Puerto Rico. I started an e-commerce business, which kind of took off, but grew too fast. Like it grew it to 0 to almost 15 million in 20 months on Facebook ads.
Wow.
But it started to come off the rails because, as you know, like managing inventory and supply chain, totally different from running a media company.
Was that the Crate Club?
Yeah, that was the Crate Club.
Or was this
So sold that, and it was a humbling experience. I actually went back to business school. I applied for this program at Harvard Business School for entrepreneurs, kind of like a 2-year entrepreneur program. I finished that a year ago just because I'm like, okay, what did I do wrong? How could I do this differently? So today I'm very proud. My kids are doing extremely well. I live between Portugal and New York. I write with John. I write on my own. I run SOFREP, and then I'm helping my son he's 21. He started a AI property tech company that's doing really, really well.
Cool.
He's got 1 year left in school. He's at St. Andrews in Scotland.
Oh my goodness.
I'm really proud of him. My daughter's at art school in London for product design. My youngest he's a junior. But yeah, they're all doing great. And I really am grateful that I have an ex-wife that we put the kids first and so yeah, I'm
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm trying to live
great stories. Yeah, that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. So John, what's your story? Like, how did you get into writing? Like, where you're from Massachusetts?
I've got an amazing background too.
It's funny.
I know. I can't wait to
hearing Brandon go through that whole history is like reminiscing for me, even though I wasn't there. It's all memories.
Yeah.
The Red Circle was the first project we did together. We started back in 2009, and I remember when he first had the idea for SOFREP. We were working together back then, and we went through his whole life on phone interviews for hours and hours and hours and hours, and that became, the Red Circle, which is like a 400-page book, good doorstop. It's a good book, and that kind of launched our partnership as co-writers. We've been doing it ever since. I think we got 8 books now, Brandon. I think it is. A bunch of them.
Wow. Yeah. Later on, remind me. I really want to get into the process, like your process for co-writing. Like that's.
I'll make my story very short, though. I think one of the reasons that I had written and published a ton of books before that. I published over 30 books, but nothing remotely like Brandon's life. I had no experience writing about the military or writing about the military life.
But what got you into writing to begin with? What was the impetus for that?
Well, one of the things I think Brandon and I click on is we're both fearless about reinventing ourselves. As you just heard him talk about, obviously, sitting in his car in La Jolla saying, oh my God, what have I done? And I've been reinventing myself kind of my whole life. I started out as a kid in a musical family. My dad was a choral conductor, a musicologist, musical family. I played the cello. I was a composer. I won awards as a kid. I wasn't a prodigy by any stretch, but I was a really curious, really active, really passionate about what I did. When I was a sophomore in high school, I dropped out of school, and a bunch of friends and I started our own high school because we weren't happy with our schools. So I started my own high school. Then I went to it.
You started your
Yeah, I know, it's pretty weird. I went to
Honestly, I think that's the first time I've ever heard those words come out of anyone's mouth.
I went to it as a senior. So I went to my school in the first graduating class. We did graduate. It was in the free school days back in the 70s, in Summerhill and all that. The whole free school move was happening. But a lot of the kids in free schools were going to school to drop out and do nothing. We wanted to drop in. We wanted to do everything. We wanted to have a school that would support us in learning, like about whatever we wanted to learn. So the first semester, we had 50 kids in 55 classes. We were studying everything from nutrition to computer science to existential literature, to you name it. I went back to that.
I imagine some adults were involved in this process, and some like how did this? I'm curious. Just I want to double click.
It was not Lord of the Flies.
Like how did this come about? No, okay. That's
hey,
what I was
the Lord
imagining.
of the Flies tie-in to our latest book. We'll get back to that, but no, it was not Lord of the Flies. One of the first things we did was decided that we were kids. We were high school kids. We knew what we wanted, but we also knew that we needed an adult on board. So we started interviewing for director. And we had an interview committee, and we interviewed about a half dozen extraordinarily qualified, amazing people. Don't ask me how we did that. We just decided that we could. And we ended up hiring a guy who was a novelist. He had a history in education. He was a stellar guy, amazing guy. And he joined us.
Where did the money come from?
At no salary. He stayed at one of our houses. Parents of one of our kids had a nice house with a guest room. He stayed there. For the second half of that year, he spent like 6 months fundraising and planning. Mm-hmm. I was the only one among us who dropped out. So it was like he and I were the team that got this school off the ground. I'd go over to his house every day, and we would jam and brainstorm, and he would fundraise. I would get there in the morning for breakfast at like 9 o'clock, and he already had a shopping bag full of typed, sealed, stamped letters that he'd typed and created, since he'd been up that morning, just writing to people to fundraise and to pitch and to promote. So, I mean, without him, it would never have happened. Without me, it never would have happened. So we built this thing. I went to the first semester, the first year. That year, we sent kids off to Yale, to Harvard. My girlfriend went to Yale from our school. We had kids graduate and go, to all kinds of schools across the map, state schools and you name it.
Is this school still
No, it ran for a decade. I went back the year after graduating and taught there for a year. And then I went on to other things, and it ran for a good 10 years. And it finally, I wasn't around when it quit. So, but it was a great run while it lasted. It was kind of like,
that's amazing.
And then from there, I bounced through a lot of careers. I got involved in nutrition. I got involved in teaching. I was a taxi driver for a while. I taught in a ghetto. But I always seemed to be the guy who was editing the newsletter or writing the column for the paper or whatever. I was always like the writing guy. And so I spent about a decade editing as an editor for some business journals and leadership journals and things like that. And then I ended up ghostwriting and co-writing and co-authoring, and then eventually, teaming up with people like Brandon to write books. Mm-hmm. It was Brandon, though, that got me into fiction. Because all my books were about business and leadership and personal development. And I wrote memoirs for people. I wrote memoirs for political people and corporate people. And
do you find, it seems like most of your work has been co-author or editor. Have you written your own without another author involved?
Yeah, I have. The great majority has been, you're right, has been co-authorships, teaming up, partnerships, but I've done some writing myself, and I'm working on a book, on a novel now myself, and I really enjoy it. But I also really enjoy working with somebody else. I think it's a little bit like being a film actor and stepping into somebody else's skin. Although in the case of a book like our thrillers that we'll talk about, I'm not writing somebody else's story like a ghostwriter. We're collaborating on fiction, so it's like we just throw both of ourselves in there. So that's a real collaboration in the truest sense. But yeah, I do love writing solo. I love writing with. I love it all.
So with Blind Fear, what's the process? I imagine, Brandon, bring all the military creative juice. How do you guys pull this off?
Well, I should start by saying the first book, I mean, Brandon alluded to this, but the first book was Steel Fear, which was an idea that Brandon brought to me back in 2009 when we were just starting to work on Red Circle. He said, would you ever be interested in writing a novel with me? And that was Steel Fear, from the Abraham Lincoln, the sexual predator. What if he was a serial killer?
Okay.
That became the premise for our first novel. So, Mark, I've never written the idea of writing a novel to me seemed like the idea of going through buds. I mean, it seemed like climbing a mountain. Like,
it does sound, I mean, it's such a different writing style.
Yeah, and
right? I mean, you got to have the arc of the story.
I mean, your 400-page novel, how do you keep track of all the plot lines? And I couldn't comprehend it, but he got me out on the end of the diving board, and we did that, and we were nominated for a Barry Award. It got a lot of accolades. You know, Lee Child wrote our cover quote, so the novel really caught, and it did really well, and people loved it. And when we sold,
did you have to reach out to, did you have to educate yourself? I mean, obviously you did, but I should ask it this way: how did you educate yourself on how to write a novel versus a narrative?
As a high school dropout, although I did graduate from my own high school, I have extensive education. I had studied with a screenwriter in Hollywood, a really amazing guy who broke down the whole writing process, and I learned a ton from him, but that's screenplays. I have another friend who's a mystery writer out of UK, who I studied a bunch of his stuff, and I read like a demon. Brandon has been reading since he was a kid. It's another bond we have. We both love reading. I read just a ton of thrillers, and I've always had a talent for breaking down processes and figuring out how they work and replicating them. And so I don't have formal training, but I just did that. And I sent the manuscript for Steel Fear. I sent to a story consultant. I paid her $1,200 to rip me a new one, and she did. It was awesome. She sent back 28 single-spaced pages saying, "There's a lot of great stuff here, and also you kind of don't know what you're doing. So let me break it down for you."
That's awesome.
It was great. She was amazing, and when we sold the manuscript for Steel Fear to Bantam, they wanted a 2-book deal right off the bat. So we were committed to Cold Fear, book 2, from the work before Steel Fear ever came out. So Steel Fear was set on an aircraft carrier. And you know this environment, but most human beings don't have a clue. It's like an alien, foreign, strange, you know what a wild environment it is. The steel tube the size of the Empire State Building, you know, with almost 6,000 souls on board for 6 months at sea. It's like,
incredible.
It's a whole city, it's a whole country in there. So that kind of set the model for us. We figured every book we did, we would find some really fascinating environment and make it come to life for the reader. So Cold Fear was in Iceland, which is really wild. And Blind Fear is in Puerto Rico in the middle of a hurricane.
Oh, nice.
I know.
Leveraging your knowledge of Puerto Rico.
We optioned it for Streamer, one of the streamers with Whip Studios. So hopefully when the strike ends, we'll get a...
It ended.
Yeah. Well, the writer, now the actor strike.
Yeah, I know. But the writer is the important part for us, because we got to get that thing written.
You optioned Blind Fear or the whole series?
Yeah, they wanted it all. Because our main character,
that's good.
Finn, is similar to like a Jason Bourne, kind of deeply flawed and kind of figuring his way in the world.
He's a SEAL chief in the series, right? Like you?
Correct.
Is he based on you, Brandon, or is he someone else?
No, definitely a mix, I think. Maybe a little bit me in there. But one of the things that John and I felt that was important to do is break down all of the stereotypes. Because he's a scrawny guy. You know, he's not your typical, not like you.
Well, it's funny. We see that. People always look at me and say, "Yeah, you look like a SEAL."
People look at me as like,
have any idea what you just
You're
said.
a SEAL. And for the record, I think
all shapes and
Mark's
sizes.
nickname was Terminator and SEAL in the SEAL team. So he was
Cyborg.
He
Yeah.
was
Cyborg.
I
Yeah.
get it.
So yeah, we wanted to deal with a lot of that kind of stereotypical stuff, and also like expose the military for the kind of beautiful, wonderful place it is as far as inclusion and meritocracy. So our characters are super diverse, like strong women, in leadership roles, and yeah, I think we did a really good job. But it's a mix for sure. John would say, and
Right.
you know, I started fumbling my way through the manuscript, and then I got John somehow to agree to help me out, and then. You know, I didn't have Finn. John created Finn, their last name. So I give him full credit for that.
Yeah.
So how has the process evolved? So that first one, you tried to write it and you said, holy shit, this is hard work. So you brought John in, and I'm sure John probably did a lot of the heavy lifting after that.
Here, take this. Hey, so the process is actually really kind of fascinating because we start out by just brainstorming back and forth, mostly on email, but we get on the phone sometimes. Brainstorm about kind of the big ideas of the story. There's typically a plot twist somewhere near the end, which comes first. It's like Brandon, and a lot of these big ideas come from Brandon's experience in the military and also in SOFREP, because some of this stuff is stuff he's covered as a journalist. Right. And we hashed through some sort of story setup, obviously location. And then we kind of kick me off and running to start the ball rolling in terms of writing. And then what I do is I you're right. As you said before, Brandon supplies the military background. The moment I bump into something where I don't know how this works, I'm over to Brandon. And not all military. Like, for example, in Blind Fear, Finn, this character who's the SEAL chief, water is kind of his superpower. And when he makes contact with water,
you mean working in and around the water?
He's in his element. He loves being in the water, and it nourishes and it feeds his character. And we figured in Blind Fear, book 3, we're going to really finally get him in the water, and although not under the water, that's still in our future. But there are a couple of scenes where he takes a little fishing boat out on the Sound between Vieques and Puerto Rico, in increasingly bad weather, and ultimately in a hurricane. It's crazy, and I have no idea what that experience would be like, but Brandon does. So I would just say to Brandon, "Hey, Brandon."
Yeah, I was going to say I'm glad you told your story, Brandon, because that sounds a lot like.
John's like, I need you to
sounds a lot like you at 18 or something.
I feel like a painter. Well, I got a canvas here, this blank, and I got this palette of all these colors, and the palette is Brandon's life. I just I think we'll use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because I know his life so well, or at least a lot of it so well, after all these years of writing together, that I can kind of say, oh, I remember when Brandon did this or this happened, and then I'll connect with him, and he'll give me more detail, and he'll spell it out, or he'll write a draft and kick it over my way.
That's cool. So the two of you together have kind of developed a brand, right?
Yep.
And so I noticed you even have a website that is the two of your names.
Right. Webb and Mann.
Webb and Mann. That's really interesting. So when you sell a book, that's that's what's selling the books. The oomph of the first 3. Like I could see this.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what's your plans? Do you have any vision for what's next? I mean, how far can this go?
I mean, I think
the TV thing is the real wild card for us. I think.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to help. Like, it's going to really help us kind of build. Because what I
kind of like Jack Carr's Terminalist really put him on.
Yeah, no, and I mean, he's done a great job, and I love Terminalist for many reasons. But that's kind of like we're in that same boat. And when you're writing, what I learned was a lot of your nonfiction fans don't read fiction and they don't care. So I didn't bring John and I didn't bring a lot of fans over to the fiction as much as I thought would make a difference. But and then as a kind of the business of fiction, you have to get a few books out there. You have to build fan base. I think each mass market paperback release gets us a bigger fan base because it's a cheaper barrier to entry. People can pick it up at Walmart. So I think once once Blind Fear hits mass market paperback, I think next year, right, John? Next spring.
It's amazing. Every time the mass market paperback comes out, the sales numbers to date literally double, like in a week or two. It's just like as Brandon says, it's a low point of entry, Walmart and so on. So yeah.
Right. And then we get the series on, in production and on air. And I think John and I we have a Bourne type series we could write indefinitely, similar to what's happening now. Like the Clancy series is ongoing. The Bourne series is ongoing. So I think we have something. I think we have a really good character. Yeah. The fans that we do have are really invested. So I'm excited about it. And, there's other things that, John and I wrote a book called The Killing School, which is about my time as the sniper course manager. And through my business school experience, one of my classmates owns a video game company and got acquired by a conglomerate. And she's like, hey, I want to make the sniper video game. So as this kind of these, and so we're a year into that project right now. And that's for Xbox, PlayStation. So as these things kind of pop, I think it will elevate John and I's profile a little bit more and give us, because publishing also, it's a weird environment today. I have a friend, senior editor, and he's like, we're buying books that we know aren't going to sell just to check the kind of cultural box, which I guess some of that stuff needs to happen, but it's kind of crazy. I wrote an article about it on my blog a few weeks ago. It's a strange place to be, kind of single white male right now. And if I didn't have the skill thing, I think I'd be screwed. But we're making our way in the world.
Yeah, no, self-publishing obviously has made everyone an author. Right. So it's really hard to stand above the fray. So I'm curious, like, I know, Brandon, you're kind of like me. You've got your business, you got, multiple sources of income. So you're probably not relying on your royalties to live off of. So how does that work for you, John? I mean, you got a lot of books out there. I mean, like, what is it for someone who's like thinking, hey, I want to be a full-time author? Yeah. How hard is that?
It's a full-time author, as in it supports your life. That's like murderously difficult. Yeah, the odds are very low. Very difficult.
That's what I thought.
But I've written a lot of books, and some of them were commercially not hugely successful, but some have been very successful, and so that kind of carries the weight, which is great. But it's like there are a lot of people who ask that question. I got a 1-year teaching program now where I'm coaching and teaching aspiring writers how to become an author, because there's so much advice out there, and a lot of it is not necessarily bad, but it's not really very practical, and some of it's downright bad and just totally sucks. So part of what I'm up to right now is mentoring new authors, because there's a lot of people who have a great story to tell, but you're right, self-publishing has made everybody an author, but unfortunately it hasn't made everybody a good or successful author.
No, the barrier to entry is so low, there's a lot of crap. But I got to tell you, like, excuse me. Well, first of all, Brandon, thank you for the introduction to St. Martin's, because I'm on my, third book with them coming out next year, and still working with Michael.
That's great.
Great guy. Actually, it's my fourth with them. Yeah, my fourth. But the book that has made me the most money, Unbeatable Mind, which is the name of a program that I have, came out of that program. I have self-published on Amazon, and it's probably earned me 10 times of anything I've earned cumulatively from all the big house books. So the way that works is, of course, you have a following and people, you have a platform and they keep buying it. I get royalty checks every month to this day, and it's like 11 years old.
John and I have a little bit of that, because we only because early on we negotiated audio rights. And the audio rights.
There we go. That was brilliant.
As we get the checks, they still come, right, John? Like 10 years later.
Audio listenership just keeps.
It is amazing. Audiobooks, such a huge listenership.
Yeah, you negotiated that with St. Martin's. I kind of pitched that to Homeler, and they were like, "No,
that's because we're not going." That's our fault.
Martin, why they don't give away audio?
Sorry. Thanks very much.
Sorry about that.
Hilarious.
Yeah, they got
bugger.
And now we're using so much artificial intelligence. We can we can clone your voice, Mark, and have your AI clone read the audio and put out an audiobook of you
What?
talking in less than an hour.
Is this your son's company?
No,
or
no,
just
just
something?
I hired this young music producer is into AI, and I just went down the AI rabbit hole thanks to my son, because he said, Dad, you needed to use ChatGPT for this. Yeah.
But don't you miss a lot of the intonation and emotional energy that you would put into reading your own stuff?
I'm going to send you something, a
I'd be
5-minute
curious.
movie where they cloned David Attenborough's voice. I think that's his name. The guy that narrated Planet Earth, the British
Edinburgh.
guy. Edinburgh, yeah.
Yeah.
Blow your mind. Like it is that good. It's there. Like, and it's only going to get better.
Wow.
Like I can imagine an audiobook producer adding in different voices and bringing characters to life like you can't even imagine. So it's there right now. And
It's going to be a fascinating time in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, may we live in interesting times. You guys are doing great work. I really, really love it. Is there anything else you know that we didn't cover you'd love to share? I want to also learn where you want people to find more info.
I just want to say people should read the books. They're really fun.
Of course, yeah.
I'm going to say this, just because
You can read them out of order too. You can read them out of order.
That's right. You can.
Oh, really?
But
Okay.
people, we haven't said much about the books themselves, but I want to say that, the character Finn is central to the whole deal. Each one of the books is a self-contained mystery and adventure. And yeah, you can read them, self-contained that way. But also Finn, the character, is evolving a ton over the course of the books. He has a hell of an arc to move, because he starts out with gigantic holes in his memory. He has no last name because he doesn't know his last name, or because he doesn't remember it, or he's got a lot of holes in his makeup that he's starting to fill in piece by piece. So by the end of book 3, he's a different person than by the beginning of book 1, and he's still got a long way to go. But it's a hell of an adventure.
Yeah. I can't wait to see the Netflix.
Yeah, you and me both, brother.
You got to keep me posted on that, Brandon.
I will, yeah.
So
webandman.com for sure. You can find everything we've done there. And then all of our personal social is on there as well, right, John?
Yep. It's all there.
So that's WEBB and MANN.
Right.
Yeah.
So 2 B's and 2
That's
N's.
it.
Definitely
Awesome.
appreciate the listeners reading the books, because it'll make a difference, Those.
It all does, right? It adds
It
up,
does.
and I think I love this type of writing. If I had more time, I would alternate between a thriller and something more along the lines of like what I'm trying to learn. But that's great stuff, and congratulations. So look forward to many more.
Yeah, we got to stay in touch.
Brandon,
too.
when you're out in San Diego, let's get together.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Do you ever get out here anymore?
I do actually. I'm out there, ironically, this week for a paid speaking engagement, but it's like an out and back.
Nice.
But I will.
You still have your plane in that hangar?
No, I sold the plane. I have one in Portugal now, but
Okay.
yeah, no, I still fly with those guys in San Diego, so I do get out there.
John, I got to tell you, Brandon, wants to take me up flying, which we actually had a ball, but we pull out and we start heading down, to turn onto the runway, and all of a sudden, like the whole thing just like shuts down, and we just go, and we veer right into the fence. I'm like, we're off to a good start here, aren't we,
Oh
Brandon?
my god, I forgot that.
I'm just
You
in my
can plane
first.
with that.
If that's the only plane accident I'm ever in, I'm doing pretty well.
We got it fixed. Yeah, it's freaking
It's good to do
Dak
that on the
airport.
ground. You want to do that on the ground. That's good.
You want to crash on the ground. Awesome, guys.
I forgot all of it.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks for your time, guys, today. I really appreciate it. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah, good to catch up.
Thanks,
Mark.
Mark.